Well,
All right,
hello.
ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, go ahead, Tim. Miscommunication on who's hosting.
Yeah, well, sorry. Your host, you host. This was your idea, impromptu idea. I'm unprepared. Let's go.
Well, hello. I am Brandon Kirby, a.k.a. the Drunken Libertarian, and with me today, as always, is Tim the Toolman Moen. Tim, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm a little groggy right now. I'm in between night shifts. As you know, Brandon, I'm out there on the front lines of the pandemic, seeing spikes in COVID cases, and that was a rough night last night. And I tried listening to that budget, and it kind of put me to sleep. I dozed off a few times, so I might have to hit you up for some of the highlights. I heard a few things that piqued my interest, but yeah, there's where I'm at.
Excellent. Well, let's dig into it. I mean, there was quite a bit there. This is a consequential budget. There's no way around it. It's I'm not going to go on the record and say anything positive about it because I really didn't see a whole lot there that gave me hope for the future of economic growth within Canada. But be that as it may, it's definitely a consequential budget.
It's consequential, all right. Yeah, I didn't see the final tally or I don't think they mentioned it in the throne speech there. But I did hear that it was expected to be create a debt that is bigger than the cumulative debt of the previous 22 prime ministers, and that would not surprise me based on all the spending on it. Let's just hit some of the highlights here.
I don't recall what the actual number of the deficit was. It was right around 360 billion. They did give a specific figure. I have come across it, but it was around 360 billion. What they were talking about in the rumor mill came into fruition. So that's the projected. Now, again, budgets don't always match their projections. Any accountant worth his salt can tell you that. But we're looking at a serious. I mean, the Canadian economy is about 2.2 trillion. So we're looking at over 10% of the GDP, which is that's unheard of.
Yeah, it is. And, obviously taxes aren't going to be enough to pay for this. So they're going to have to print scads of money and rob the Canadians' buying power to pay for it. And when that happens, when they turn on the printing presses at the central bank, the big guys always make out better than the little guys.
Always.
The velocity of money says that the people that get access to that money first, the big banks, the megacorps that are and their cronyist pals, they always they enjoy the buying power of that dollar. And by the time it trickles down to us little guys, that buying power has eroded considerably. And so when we see the price of milk and everything else go up twice as much next year or the year after, or even more, I mean, we're already seeing stress on lumber prices in different areas. That is the government robbing you of your buying power, and that comes from this kind of spending. And I mean, of course, the last year there was an unprecedented amount of monetary spending, and that's going to create inflation. And the big guys, the megacorps and the banks, they're going to make out like bandits. The politicians always make out like bandits, and the rest of us are going to suffer the consequence of it.
Well, that's true. One of the things that I would highlight, though, just to anyone who's listening, you can protect yourselves. I remember 2015 when we voted for these deficits, we voted the Liberals in. My first thought was, gosh, why would Canadians do this to themselves? So I invested in crypto, I invested in gold, I took out some bank stocks. And, soon thereafter, I sold my bank stocks and bought my second house. So, you can be one of the fat cats that if you position yourself correctly, you can profit off of it. If you position yourself correctly, if you take 10% of your paycheck and you invest it into a portfolio, eventually that portfolio is going to grow where you're one of the ones who sees your wealth expand. But, people who don't know how the system works, they're not going to be the recipients of this. And it's the people who don't know how the system works that I'm worried about. But I think you hit the nail on the head. We're not seeing prices rise. What we're seeing is the decline of the purchasing power of our dollar. We're seeing the decline of the value of money. I mean, okay, so grocery prices, I don't know what the situation is out in Alberta. I can tell you in New Brunswick, grocery prices are going both sky and high out here. We're seeing it in lumber. We're seeing it all over the place. But you're going to see it cascade all throughout the economy. And it's sad to see that happen.
Well, if we have time later, let's talk about some of the ways that our viewers and listeners out there can protect themselves and maybe come out even ahead given the coming chaos. But right now, let's hit the highlights of this budget. What stood out for you, Brandon, on this?
Probably the biggest thing was the raise of the minimum wage going to $15 an hour. That I think, and it seems to have been, that was glossed over. I didn't see it in any of the news headlines, but Freeland did mention it. So I mean, I jotted it down. But I'm not seeing it in any of the headlines. But yeah, $15 an hour. I think that's really going to hurt employment. I mean, look.
Oh yeah, there it is. 3.4, page 116, establishing a $15 federal minimum wage. Now, is that for federal workers or for everybody?
Well, it's federal minimum wage. I mean, typically the minimum wage was set provincially. There was a federal minimum wage, but all the provinces were higher than the federal minimum wage. So I'm guessing that's what it is. It could be just for federal workers, but there's going to be a lot of cost for that.
Right. Actually, I'm reading it now, and it looks like this will directly benefit over 26,000 workers who currently make less than $15 per hour in the federally regulated private sector. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to see how encompassing it is, but that's it's not cheap. It comes with a cost, and we're all going to be paying that cost.
Right. And I mean, if we're playing the race card as well, federal, minimum wage was brought in had some racist intent behind it, didn't it? Progressives that were threatened, their unions threatened by minority labor, I think in the 20s or 30s. During Reconstruction, they fought for a minimum wage to price block people out of the market. And again, it's going to be who's going to suffer from a rise in minimum wage. I think progressives think that what happens is all these people that are employed right now, well, their wage just goes up. Well, no, they start laying people off, and they lay off the people that have the fewest skills and are providing the least value. People from disadvantaged communities, that might include minorities and teenagers and lower economic, socioeconomic people who then can't get their foot in the door into the workforce to start building up those skills to become more valuable and price their wage at a higher price. They're the ones that are going to be affected. Those of us, and that's going to, enforce the cycle of poverty. Because if they can't get a job now, what do they got to do? They got to get a handout. So, that's a terribly tragic thing.
Yeah, I might sound like a horse's ass coming against minimum wage working for the hedge fund industry, but my first job was scrubbing toilets. And I'm glad, I wasn't producing $15 worth of productivity at that time. I got my foot in the door eventually to work my way up at a call center earning $12 an hour. And I was, pretty much maxing out for what we were producing. If I didn't have the advantage to work for that kind of wage, I would have never gotten into the hedge fund industry. That's where I started out. That gave me the opportunity, and I was grateful for it. I really think we need to stress in the next election, I think we've got to be strategic about this because we believe in sound money. If we had sound money, this increases the purchasing power. When we abolished the gold standard, 31, 32, 33, there was a bit of a few benchmarks where you could say it was. The lowest minimum wage was 25 cents an hour. Well, if we simply kept it at 25 cents an hour, if you look at the value of gold today, 2021, that purchasing power, it'd still be 25 cents an hour if we never raised it, but the purchasing power would be about $30 an hour.
Right.
So who's getting that extra purchasing power? And it's, as you say, it's the fat cats at the top. It's not the low income people. They're not the ones who benefit. Yeah. It's the people.
And the people that progressives claim it's going to, it's going to eat the rich, right? It's going to affect the fat cats at the top by introducing a minimum wage. They're the last people that are going to get affected by it. They're the ones that are pushing for a minimum wage. The Walmarts and the Costcos and the Amazons of the world, they can afford to pay the minimum wage. It's their competition that can't. So if you want to entrench a monopoly, this is part of how you do it. Well, let's go through the budget here. We promised the folks an analysis of this budget. Let's go through the high points of it. I've got it opened up here. I'll just go through the headlines of the budget.
Sure.
And we can make our comments from there. I see there's a few comments coming in already. Tom has said they'll just ask Uncle Klaus. I think he's talking about Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset. And, this budget definitely reflects that. We will definitely get to that, Tom, because there is a part of the budget that definitely has the fingerprints of the Great Reset all over it, let's just say. But let's start from the top here. Okay. First of all, finishing the fight against COVID-19, keeping Canadians healthy and safe. And I had to chuckle when I was listening to this part, because she was talking about how this was like a natural disaster, right? All these people are out of work. And if you don't support this budget, well, you're not a person who just got laid off by their employer, or a student who can't get a job, or this.
You saw that part.
I'm thinking to myself, you guys are the reason why they're unemployed, why they're getting laid off. This is a classic example. Harry Browne, the great libertarian leader from the States, one of the best libertarians that ever existed, in my humble opinion, used to say that government is really good at breaking your legs and then giving you a crutch and expecting to be thanked for it. And this is a perfect example of that. Government here has broken Canadians' legs, absolutely shattered their lives over the past year and a bit. And now it is it's playing like it's a charitable entity, just this motherly, empathetic, compassionate thing now, lifting them up. Okay, I mean, it's a cycle of abuse. It is. You batter people down, and then you demand, almost like a thanks when you try to compensate them for that damage that you've created for them. But how about we just stop damaging people? How about you just stop locking them down? How about you stop destroying the economy? Stop shutting down businesses. That might be a good one. All right.
I think on top of I saw a meme recently where somebody had talked about their abusive ex-boyfriend, and then at the end they said, by the way, that wasn't my boyfriend, that was the government. I don't know how to encapsulate the feeling that I get when I heard Chrystia Freeland, and Justin Trudeau does it all the time, where they talk down to you saying, this is their plight, and I understand their plight. And it's like, no, you don't. You're voting for yourselves these massive wage increases, and all of a sudden you want to pretend to understand the problems that they themselves caused. It's so infuriating.
Yeah, and just the tone of her voice. This is kind of a petty thing, and I feel embarrassed for bringing it up, but the impression I got the whole time she was talking to me through the screen there was that she was a kindergarten teacher talking down to her little children. And this is, I've often said that the liberal mentality is that that other people that aren't them, that aren't part of the elite, these scientific central planners who are super intelligent as they see themselves, they're just little children. And especially minorities are little children, right? They look at minorities as they have no agency. They're absolutely helpless without government. And I find it pretty disgusting. And her tone was just full of that today.
Something worth looking up is Manchester syndrome by proxy. I mean, it's permeated throughout the budget, but it's when a caregiver can't accept that the person they're caring for is getting well. It's even worse than that. It's they make the person they're supposed to be caring for sick so that they can get attention when they bring them in for care and are helping them get better. That's their identity.
And so it's not just that they imagine they're getting sick, they actually make them sick. I see this on my job sometimes. So it's a disturbing thing. Okay,
that's a whole other podcast. Yeah,
that's a whole other podcast. But that is basically the first part of this budget is finishing the fight against COVID. Again, they're breaking your legs and then handing you a crutch, and that's what it is. It talks about extending subsidies, all sorts of subsidies, rent subsidies, wage subsidies, emergency business accounts, all that kind of thing. So all the stuff that we've been seeing over the past year, they're extending that till the end of September. Part two is create creating jobs and growth. And here we get into women in the economy. And of course, we heard over and over again how this this pandemic disproportionately affects women.
It's a she session, as Trudeau says in that condescending,
sure, right,
paternalistic.
right. It's a she session. And, you know, I don't know whether there's truth to that. There probably is some truth to that. Certainly, you know, now, like here we have a population of Canadians that are used to government funded daycare in the form of public education, right? So we've gotten used, you know, and parents, their biggest complaint with schools shutting down is that, what am I going to do for childcare? You know, so they've gotten used to this. So, you know, we've got a population of parents that have abdicated the responsibility of looking after their children to the state for years. And then when the state can't do it, well, now the Canadians are unduly affected by it. We've got relief from student debt here. I don't know the full details on that. I kind of missed out on that. I don't know
They
how much
canceled interest on student loan until 2030, which,
okay,
you know,
well, that'll keep the cost of education down, won't it, Brandon?
yeah, absolutely. Jeez. Yeah, it's going to take a nosedive for sure.
Cheap student loans haven't increase the cost of post-secondary education.
So tuition fees are going to go up because demand goes up. But, you know, one of the things a friend of mine said right before the budget started, he was over and he said, well, tell me what they do about student loan, because I said it's probably going to be part of the budget. And he said, I'm going to be so pissed if they do something there, because he just forked over $10,000 to pay off his student loans. You know, for the people that worked hard, I think a good solution to this is to make student loans part of bankruptcy. Like, you can go bankrupt. And I mean, I don't advocate doing that. I'm a finance guy, but people can't do that. But there has to be some sort of reward for people working hard, paying off their student loans. And now that's been completely taken away from them. There's no reason for them to have done that at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If liberals are paternalistic and condescending, I'll call and chiming in from Calgary, I think. O'Toole is no better. Yeah, no, you're definitely right there. You know, Jagmeet Singh is demanding that the Prime Minister enact the Emergency Measures Act, right? It used to be the War Measures Act that gives the government all sorts of powers to suspend civil liberties and expropriate things and do all that, you know. But what I think some people are forgetting is that that's what O'Toole was demanding just over a year ago as he was running for leader of the Conservative Party, and the Conservatives still elected that tool in as their leader. So I can't decide anymore, Brandon, are conservatives, progressives driving the speed limit, or are progressives, conservatives driving the speed limit? Our parties have literally blurred that line now. It's a sad state of affairs.
Well, I think they've done that. But I mean, if you take a look at the Conservative, if you take a look at O'Toole, he's to the left of where Trudeau was in 2015. So, I mean, yeah, maybe he's out pacing Trudeau in some areas, but certainly overall, I mean, they're very far to the left party. Stephen Harper, by multiple metrics, was to the left of Pierre Elliott Trudeau in terms of spending. Yeah. But
Eric has an interesting comment here, and I noticed this too, actually, during the budget. There was a paragraph there where Freeland said that, talked about all the things that were going to be the backbone of Canadian economy. She talked about all these green innovations and digital innovations and steel and aluminum. But noticeably missing from this was oil and gas, the thing that powers, especially Western Canada, but really the rest of Canada. So I thought that was fairly interesting as well.
Big in New Brunswick too. I mean, St. John, New Brunswick's got the largest oil refinery, but I can tell you, I think we've got real potential for growth here as a party, because you take a look at Aaron O'Toole supporting a carbon tax. I suspect it's gonna cost them big in Alberta, but Saskatchewan is where we've got the capacity to pick up some steam. New Brunswick as well. With Aaron O'Toole supporting a carbon tax, I think this is a promise for real growth for the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Everyone seems to be absolute junk these days. All right, where are we at here? So we're still on Chapter 2, creating jobs and growth. Okay, here's where we get to the federal minimum wage, employee ownership trust. actions against predatory lending. Well, here's one good thing. They talk about opening up trade barriers in Canada. I think that, as long as they're doing it by removing barriers rather than creating federal programs, I think that's a good thing. So there's one positive thing I think we can say in this absolutely quagmire of junk. But investing in Canada's entrepreneurs. Oh, did you hear this one, Brandon? And correct me if I'm wrong here, because I was half asleep when I was listening to this. Friedland's voice, just something about it made me lull off to sleep, like I was back in kindergarten again or something. It was nap time. But she mentioned something about, I think it was $4 billion into some kind of tech. She called it a core of tech wizards or something like that. Core of digital computing. Yeah. And training something like 180,000. Did I hear that right? 180,000 like young people to help businesses innovate and do all these things, because that's exactly what a business needs, is someone coming right out of one of these leftist institutions who's never even probably worked a job in their life, giving them business advice about what they should do for tech to help their business grow. $4 billion. I can't imagine there's going to be any nonsense going on with that at all.
Well, I think that's a good point. I mean, it's supposed to be for entrepreneurs. I don't know how entrepreneurs take advantage of the program. They're a little light on the details. I'd like to look a little bit more into it. But I can tell you it was the exact same thing. It's the exact same mentality of big government knows best, because they also invested, I think previously it was $4 billion for the infrastructure for high-speed internet in rural communities. And they did another $1 billion in this budget. And when I read that, I think that was back in 2019, I started scratching my head and I said, why are you doing that? Elon Musk is doing it for free. Like the private, not only that, but I was looking at the projections. That's the next part. They're talking about a digital accelerating broadband for everyone, right? So they want to build all this national infrastructure for broadband. Well, Elon Musk is already doing this. Well, and he's beat them to it, because I remember in 2019, I was saying, why are you, I think I wrote about it in Being Libertarian, but I said, why are you doing this when their projected end dates were 5 years after Elon Musk's projected end date? So he's going to beat them to it. Why? Because the private sector knows better than government bureaucracy. There's organizational management reasons for that. There's lots of reasons why the private sector outpaces the government. But Elon Musk, you could have spent $0 and we'd have the exact same result. Right. He's going to do it first. They're going to be slow. And it's the same mentality with this 180,000 new jobs for techies to come to your new startup for venture capitalism. A core of techies. I mean, he made it sound like it was like the core, military corps of engineers or something like that. They're going to be going out there and, it's like a national, brown shirt program of these, I'm sure, socially justice indoctrinated kids telling you how to run and innovate in your business. I'm sure that's going to go over like a lead balloon. They could just stop taking money from businesses in the first place and let them invest their own capital where they need to invest that capital, because they can make better decisions than a government and a far distant capital can make those decisions. Right. Yeah. And then here we go, Chapter 4, helping Canadian business grow and succeed. They're going to help small and medium-sized business move into the digital age. I think this is where that core of techs come in, supporting entrepreneurs, including equity-deserving entrepreneurs, supporting women entrepreneurs, supporting Black entrepreneurs. And it goes on from there, building infrastructure to boost trade. Investing, here's some interesting ones. Investing in world-leading research and innovation. Tell me just your general feeling about this line of the budget. Renewing the pan-Canadian artificial intelligence strategy. How does artificial intelligence in government grab you, Brandon? Well, maybe from the pages of 1984. I don't know. But launching a pan-Canadian genomics strategy. How about that? You want the government getting involved in genetics? I just don't know what Justin Trudeau thinks. I don't know why he thinks he's capable. It's the same thing with green tech. I have 117% rate of return on green tech. I'd be happy to talk about the advantages of it. I just don't know why they see themselves is capable in terms of finding out who's going to be doing the best R&D. Like there's nothing on their resumes that suggests that they're capable of doing it, but they think that they can. This field that they've never ventured into. Now, I mean, there's lots of things you can conjure up in terms of nightmare scenarios of the government having increased access to AI. AI is coming, and I think these nightmare scenarios are, in some sense, unavoidable. There's nightmare scenarios. I just don't know why the government feels entitled to take our money and invest in things they know nothing about.
Well, right, yeah. I mean, these are the people making these decisions have never produced a business. They've never served customers. They have been living off the plunder of others for their entire lives. They're bureaucrats and professional politicians, and they're going to be training people coming out of universities that have never had a job in their life, who are indoctrinated into the social justice ideology. And yeah, this is the idea that these people, that cabal of people, knows best what to do with my money and your money and these billions of dollars in tax revenues in order to support the innovation, as if they know where that innovation is utterly insane. But let's get into chapter 5 here, a healthy environment for a healthy economy. And this is where they start talking. This is where it really doubles down on the Great Reset and the green economy. It has the fingerprints of those all over it, growing our net zero economy. The goal is to decrease our emissions from 2005 levels by 36% by the year, what, Brandon? 2030. Does that your sound familiar? You ever hear of Agenda 2030?
Talking about Davos?
Well, that's the UN agenda for climate goals and remaking the world, into this kind of globalist infrastructure of, and it meshes perfectly with, of course, with Klaus Schwab's plan for the Great Reset. Eventually, they want to get our CO2 to net zero by 2050, which seems pretty damn ambitious, if you ask me, considering we live in a damn cold place and we need some cheap, reliable energy. And, nuclear is a ways off, and solar power doesn't work that well up here, and neither does wind or any of these other things that they want. So it'll be interesting to see what they think they're going to replace fossil fuels with. But
well, I'll tell you, with nuclear, New Brunswick has the capacity to go nuclear. We've got, I can't remember what it is. It's like 200 or 300 small modular reactors that the federal government is blocking right now. Like, we're not able to go nuclear because of government regulations. It's ridiculous. There's people that actually know how to get the job done. They're doing it at Point Lepreau in New Brunswick, and we can't get this underway because the federal government keeps blocking it. It's so frustrating. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. I think we could probably drastically reduce our carbon emissions, but be that as it may, it comes down to this: why are they the ones trying to guide that? And I really do think that we have to spend a lot of time talking about the Great Reset, because it's a group of people that think, okay, well, I know how to guide the economy. The term that I've heard is called stakeholder capitalism. I kept hearing this term again and again, stakeholder. They're not using it in the way a business sense is using the word stakeholder. They're using it as...
it's not shareholder capitalism, because it has nothing to do with people that are actually invested in your business. It's everyone in the world who might possibly have be affected in some way, or think that they might have something to say about your business. Those are the stakeholders.
Well, I went to a town hall on homelessness a couple months ago, and I saw an old friend. I used to teach her philosophy, actually, and she, without having any experience in real estate or mortgages or anything like that, is now heading up a project to help end homelessness and produce new homes. And she used that word. She's like, I'm going to consult with stakeholders. And our MP, the Green MP, Jenica Atwin, she said, we need to consult with stakeholders. Then I heard the term at World Economic Forum, Davos, stakeholder capitalism. And what that means essentially is people, how best to say it? The government tends to appoint people politically, whereas the private sector tends to appoint people for productivity. So these political appointments are not necessarily people that have any executional intelligence whatsoever on the things that they're weighing in on. We need to consult with stakeholders basically means we need to consult with people that don't know what they're talking about and have never accomplished anything. This is a recipe for doing nothing. I don't see emissions coming down because the government's taking over. I don't see
No.
housing getting taken care of. The Liberals have been spending billions and billions year over year on these housing initiatives.
Sure.
There haven't been any houses built in my riding. They've done some refurbishments in Vancouver, but that's about it. They're people that don't know what they're doing that get to spend billions of dollars on projects that never go anywhere. So it's sick what's happening.
And these guys are about to create a wave of homelessness as they're inflating the housing bubble right now by suppressing interest rates. And there's in my community, you put a house on the market and it's gone within 4 hours after a bidding war where people are paying $20,000, $30,000 over asking for it. And now that's because the interest rates are so low. Now imagine the interest rates just go up a few percentage points. They don't even have to go up to 10% or anything, or even 80s levels interest rates where they went up to 18%. They just have to go up a few percent, and we're going to have thousands and thousands of people who can't afford their mortgage anymore. So what are they going to do about that? Well, that brings us to chapter 6 of the budget, which is more affordable housing. So they're going to take your tax money and they're going to build a bunch of housing, because that has always worked out well when government built a bunch of housing for people.
They never get any houses built.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, not in my neck of the woods. And that's a problem, because when I went to the town hall and in 2 of the debates that I did, I said the problem is with CMHC. If you want to fix homelessness, where we have to start is charities have to have the capacity to qualify. There's so many different ways in which mortgage insurance is not allowing that. The appraisal system is probably chief among them. I used to be a mortgage broker, for anybody listening in. And I said, this is what the problem is. And we had a local charity that we were going to solve homelessness. They're going to snatch up a hotel and all the homeless could stay there and they could live like kings and do all the meth they want. And they were denied because of CMHC. And I kept bringing this up at the town hall. It's denied because of CMHC. And why do these projects continually get denied? High financing, but continual denials, continually not going anywhere. And it's because the people heading them up, stakeholder capitalism, the people heading them up, don't know what they're doing. There's no executional capacity for this.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so
I'm a broken record. I'm sorry. I'm pissed. I'm all riled up now.
Wow, Brandon, I hear you, buddy. All right, sorry, I just have to go back here.
Gotta calm down.
So we're on chapter 6 here, strengthening the cities and communities we call home. There's a bunch of support for the CBC in here, supporting Canadian book industry. Here's something that isn't bad. There's worse things to spend money on than a memorial to the victims of communism. That's good. Okay.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
There's a memorial to the victims of communism.
I didn't know that.
Kudos.
I didn't
Kudos.
hear that in the speech. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I don't like the government's using communist tactics to support a memorial to the victims of communism. But, if you're going to spend money on something, I guess there's worse things. Extending the Northern residence deduction. Okay, that's good. Less taxes is always a good thing. Okay, let's get to part 3, a resilient and inclusive recovery. So here we go into fighting systemic racism and empowering communities, supporting Black Canadian communities, better data for better outcomes. I have no idea what any of this stuff means. Anytime I see the government getting involved in separating people and identifying them based on their immutable characteristics, my hairs go up on the back of my neck. I think nothing good can come from that other than an increase in racial tension and division and subjugation. And, I think that's a bad thing. Chapter 8, strong Indigenous communities.
I think we should talk about that for a little bit, because individualism, I think, is the solution to racism.
Yes.
I don't think big government, Marxist, race-based analysis, gender-based analysis. I think working next to competent women in the workplace is the solution to sexism. I think working next to Muslims is competent, intelligent, kind, hardworking Muslims is the solution to xenophobia in that. But the more we take this race-based approach, this gender-based analysis, I think the more divisions you have. A friend of mine who's a Palestinian economist, very interesting fellow, Baland Rabaya, He, myself, and another fellow, this was not planned or designed in any way, shape, or form, but he's a Jewish fellow from Israel. And the Palestinian economist and the Jewish friend from Israel, he's the IT guy. There's economist, myself. And what he was showing about with racial tensions, war, tensions between nations, free trade is the biggest thing that mitigates that. The more free trade we have, the less racism we have, the less capacity we have to go to war, the less hatred. Like, hatred is diminished. And he was going through all sorts of regression analyses with this. He's a brilliant fellow, but that's how you end it. The free market can end this thing. It's not government saying.
Well, it's the old saying, right? That armies don't follow trade routes, right? In other words, where there's trade, there isn't likely to be armies following that because everyone is winning when there's trade. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, chapter 8, we get on to strong Indigenous communities. So, they've broken the legs off these communities and they're offering them a crutch. We can go through and, it's all the predictable stuff. Protecting our shared values. This is interesting. Keeping Canadians safe and improving access to justice. Gun control is in there.
It wasn't in the throne speech that I saw. What are they saying about gun control?
Well, I'll go to the page 277 and see what the budget actually says about gun control here. I'm sure they're giving us more gun freedom. Firearms were used in more than 40% of homicides in Canada, blah, blah, blah. Budget 2021 proposes to provide $300 million over 5 years, starting in to implement legislation to help protect Canadians from gun violence and to fight gun smuggling and trafficking. Funding will support these measures will fight gun crime in our communities and keep. Okay, so that's a pretty short thing. It's not talking about actually clamping down more. I mean, they've already done enough damage there. It's hard to imagine they could do any more damage.
Shared values in protecting our borders. Who are these people? Maxime Bernier?
Well, yeah. Okay. So that's kind of a relief that they're not talking about more gun. It's more about gun smuggling and fighting gun crimes, which who knows what that looks like. But it's something, at least in theory, we can possibly not freak out about too much. What else do we got here? Diverting youth away from the justice system, capacity of superior courts. Yeah. Well, okay, now we get into.
Go ahead.
I'm just moving on to part 4 here, which is fair and responsible government. And here's where it's interesting. Here's where I want to actually dive into some pages, because we start with a tax system that promotes fairness. We have a digital services tax, a luxury tax, a tax on unproductive use of Canadian housing, limitations on excess interest deductions, preventing cross-border tax schemes. Is that going to affect your business? Let's see here.
Who do you think knows more about the tax code, myself or Christia Freeland? I'm not worried.
Yeah. You'll find the loopholes. If you need a loophole, Brandon will find it for you.
For those who don't know, I have a hedge fund service company that's based in the Cayman Islands. So if she wants to go to war, it's on.
Yeah. All right. There's a bunch of digital mumbo jumbo here. Okay. So budget 2021, here's what the digital service tax is at a rate of 3% on revenue from digital services that rely on data and content contributions for Canadian users. Okay. So you can expect your bill on things like, I imagine, Netflix and cable and everything else to go up 3%. It's estimated this measure will raise $3.4 billion in revenue over 5 years.
Yeah, I think the quality for programs that you don't pay for we're going live on Facebook right now. So what's the quality of that going to look like? Are there going to have to be more ads, for example? Are we going to see more throttling of the pages we want so they get replaced by sponsored ads?
We're using StreamYard right now, and we're broadcasting to YouTube and a couple other places. How you're right. How are these platforms like StreamYard and YouTube and Facebook going to come up with that 3%? They're going to need to make 3% somehow off of this broadcast that we're doing right now, which seems absolutely insane. A tax on sales of, here's the luxury tax. It's a tax on the sale for personal use of luxury cars and personal aircraft with retail values priced over $100,000. and boats for personal use over $250,000. The tax would be calculated at the lesser of 20% of the value, or 10%.
Here's what popped into my mind when I read that. When you take a look at luxury cars, how the electric vehicle market is looking to expand is they do the luxury cars first. And the reason why is the margins are so much higher. So you can turn profits really easy with the luxury cars than you do the mid-level, and then you do the budget cars. They just work the way down. So if they're going to cut off luxury cars and make them not profitable for the electric vehicle market, then the electric vehicle market's going to have a hard time expanding. We're not going to have market saturation. I don't know how that's going to play out. I don't know what the rollout or what the execution looks like. I'm going to have to see more details on it. But superficially, when I first saw that, I was thinking, then how's the electric vehicle market supposed to expand?
Yeah, that's a good point. Teslas aren't that cheap, but okay. And then it goes on. They're talking about tackling tax avoidance and evasion here. They're going to spend a bunch of money to try to clamp down and audit GST on large businesses. They're going to strengthen the CRA with $230 million, which they think will get them $5 billion in outstanding taxes over 5 years. So it's going to be tougher to avoid government plunder, I guess.
Everybody says that all the time. There's going to be some sort of a Canadian version of FATCA, is what Jagmeet Singh was saying, something to that effect, where they're going to be looking at people moving their money around with multinational corporations. And Chrystia Freeland was hinting on, but they're so light on the details. I don't even know that it's necessarily a good thing, because when you write a check to the Cayman Islands, the money grows. And then when you take the money back into Canada, you repatriate the funds, it gets taxed. It's like a glorified RRSP. It's not necessarily tax revenue negative. It might even be a good thing. I wouldn't make that assertion. I'm just saying I don't know what it is that they're getting at. But year over year in every budget, every leftist is saying we need to close down these tax loopholes. Can you be a little bit heavier on the specifics? And they never are. And the reason why they never are is exactly what we're talking about, stakeholder capitalism. You look at what Trudeau said. He said low-income Canadians don't pay income taxes. He said that in February 2019 in QP, low-income. So he doesn't understand the tax code. Chrystia Freeland, no background in finance whatsoever, is going to work to crack down on tax loopholes. The hell does she know what she's doing? She doesn't know what she's doing. And yet they're heading up these massive projects. Like it's a bizarre world that we live in, where people put their trust, especially leftists who actually have these as objectives. You and I don't have these as objectives, but they do. They put their trust in people that don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's insane. That pretty much sums up the budget. Those are the really high level Coles Notes version, just the stuff that stuck out to Brandon and I right off the top. The other thing that they mentioned right at the end was that their target is that they believe the economy will rebound, where the debt to GDP ratio will be 1% in 2 years. Now, this was supposed to be their target. Right now, the debt to GDP ratio is supposed to be this. They said that all their spending was actually going to bring in more revenue and increase business and all that kind of thing. And of course, you can't really do that when the economy's shut down. But now in 2 years, it's going to be. What do you think of that? Do you think that's even possible?
Well, they must be referring to deficit to GDP ratio. It's 1%.
Or maybe it was deficit to GDP. Yeah.
Could be. So I guess they'd be projecting like a $44 billion deficit. Is it possible? You know what the problem is? The problem is when government spending is like heroin. It makes things worse and worse and worse, and yet people get addicted to it anyways. Like it's hard to get people weaned off of it. And so when you introduce these new programs, it's hard to just quit cold turkey and to say, okay, well, we're going to go down to these levels of spending. If they can grow the economy, I mean, the question is predicated on whether or not they can grow the economy. The problem is when you do spending, because we live in a global world these days, this is not the world that John Maynard Keynes lived in. This is 2021. If you hire a road worker to develop some infrastructure, they're not spending it on Canadian goods. They're buying Japanese cars. They're buying electronics from South Korea. They're buying Florida oranges. They're buying Scotch whiskey, which, I'm not against any of these things. I think they're fantastic, and I love free trade. But the reality of the situation is when you increase spending, you're not necessarily investing in the Canadian economy. And they're talking about, well, we'll increase spending and you're going to see this in terms of economic output. That's not what happens. What happens is they buy foreign goods, which, again, I'm all for free trade. But when you buy the foreign goods, it leaves us with the debt, and other economies prosper because of it.
Well, government misallocates those funds, right? Whereas you and I in a private sector, we would be putting that money towards things that where we have personal skin in the game, where our livelihoods are at risk.
Yep.
We make good and damn sure that money, that we don't kill that money, that it goes somewhere that it's going to grow and it's going to produce value, and that's going to benefit us. And, government doesn't have any skin in the game. None of these people have any skin in the game. They're just tossing money around to virtue signal. And of course, that destroys wealth, because it not only kills that money by misallocating it, in the first place, it removes it from people who would otherwise invest it. So it kills things in two different ways. But here I was just looking up the debt to GDP ratio, and Canada's debt to GDP ratio right now is 343%. It's one of the highest in the world. So we're even higher than the States, and we hear trillions of dollars being printed up in the States there under Biden and Trump, and they're still not as bad as Canada. Canada is in a far worse position. So yeah, buckle your seatbelts. And so I want to get into the next bit here, because before we sign off, Brandon, we promised our listeners here some of your advice about how we can pretend. And look, I'm selfishly asking for myself. Like, I have some ideas. I'm not a financial wizard like you are. I've got some crypto stuff. I've got some precious metals. Obviously, I recognize our dollar is, in its death throes right now, and is likely to be killed off here in the next decade, probably. And so we need to be prepared for that. I also recognize there's a housing bubble being blown up right now. And I don't know whether, here's my thought on purchasing a house right now. Like, you tell me, is it better to buy a house now while the interest rates are low? Assuming that interest rates go up, I can still afford the mortgage payments, or is it better to wait for a crash and then, buy when there's blood in the water? And to me, I guess the factor is the money printing going to, like, if I buy a house right now for $500,000, even though that seems expensive right now, at the rate they're printing money, that house might be worth $2 million in a few years, because money is worthless. So in some aspects of buying a house for $500,000 now, if we think that the dollar is going to become more and more worthless at a rapid pace, might not be a bad investment. But if we think the dollar is going to hold its value, then it is a bad investment. Am I on the right track? Am I on the wrong track? Am I thinking about this the wrong way?
No, I think you're right. I mean, it's going to perform inversely. The value of housing stabilizes over time. So do commodities as well. So insofar as you see fluctuations,
assuming a stable dollar and a proper free market banking system,
whatever performs inversely, but you don't necessarily have to invest in the Canadian housing market or the American housing market, because again, we live in a global, there's multiple jurisdictions where you're not going to see this sort of a collapse. Peter Schiff, who's a name that would be familiar, is actually recommending New Zealand as a place to take a look at, which sounds odd because their prime minister, Jacinda, is a bit of a socialist, but the policies there are actually they're quite market friendly. So I'm not too worried about places like New Zealand, but I would always recommend commodities. I'd always recommend anything that performs inversely. But again, take a look at the budget. The budget, you see a lot of these programs are earmarked for specific industries. It's not going to work out for you and I, but okay, so we're going to see the collapse of the dollar. Well, who's printing out the dollar? The big banks. Who's issuing these bonds? You're going to see a lot of bond issuance. Who's profiting off of that? So buy those stocks where people profit off of the collapse of the dollar. That's what I recommend. I mean, you always want to do your.
And so what are some of those? Just give me an example of some of the types of industries or places people should look where they can find businesses that are going to profit off the collapse of the dollar.
Oh, the financial sector for sure. Yeah, the financial sector, absolutely. I mean, I just took out some more shares in BMO today, so it's
Right.
that's where I think you're going to see a lot of people that have access to printing capacity, a lot of people that work with central banks. You're going to see their wealth go up, and you're going to see their stocks go up. Now, that being said, this is not financial advice, because I am anticipating a bit of a market correction that I myself am recognizing. I'm probably just going to ride out the wave of the market correction.
Right.
And we'll buy stocks.
And you're also making a big assumption there too, Brandon, that I won't be prime minister, right? Because if I'm prime minister, those fat cats, those that stuff you just invested in is going to be junk, because the central banks and all these financial service firms, they're propped up by cronyist regulation. They're propped up by state violence. So you're making a pretty big assumption there, right? Are you really going to roll the dice that I'm not prime minister?
I'm rolling the dice that when you become prime minister, you're going to set corporate taxes to zero. And I'll be on my hands and knees praying that that comes first before we eliminate central banking. That'll be just fine. But
okay.
Well, actually,
we're already developing a cronyist relationship here. I don't like it.
Well, I have raised that question. A lot of my banking friends have asked me that question, because when I talk about libertarianism to people in the financial sector, they'd always say, yeah, but so what I do is, if you take a look at the balance sheets of how much a lot of people, the oil and gas industry, I'm totally opposed to subsidies going to oil and gas industry. I think it's terrible. I don't like giving money to people who poison the air we breathe. I think it's stupid. But if we actually eliminated their corporate tax, they're going to be up. Like, they're going to be doing better than if we simply keep the situation the way it is and continue to subsidize them. Same thing with the banks. If we eliminate the capacity to print free money, okay, yeah, that's really going to hurt their profit margins. There's no question about that. That's going to hurt them huge. But if you eliminate their tax bill, I think that offsets it. And then in the end, there'll probably be some stability there. I mean, in the long run.
Yeah,
but that's what I recommend. Commodities, cryptocurrency, not Bitcoin, but cryptocurrencies. If you have a diversified portfolio in the financial sector, those are the people that are going to make a lot of. There's other sectors as well. I think we saw that in the budget today too, especially with telcos. They regulate the competition out of existence.
Right.
Well, that's fantastic. So their profit margins get to, I mean, everyone else has to pay more for their cell phone bill. Well, that sucks. Sucks for them.
As long as we have the CRTC, we're going to have a bottleneck on mobile, on data and telecoms, right? There's going to be basically, I think there's 7 big corporations that control the market. There's no room for anyone else to get in. They divvy out their tokens to these small players like Fido and other things, but essentially they're operating on, it's owned by basically 7 corporations, and no one else is getting that because of the CRTC. Buying land in New Zealand looks like it's off the table. I thought this was the case because I have a couple of friends. I know a billionaire, Rick Rule, actually, he has land in New Zealand, and he mentioned that they're looking at, all these billionaires are looking at New Zealand as a safe haven where they can get away from geopolitical forces that the rest of the world kind of faces. I think that's one of the reasons why New Zealand was able to shield itself from the pandemic, is because they're on an isolated, remote kind of part of the world, and I think that's what is attractive in some part to people. But
we're gonna have to talk about. I don't know how much time you have, but we're gonna. Have to talk
I don't have a lot of time. I'm gonna have to wrap up here pretty quick. I got to work tonight, and I'm on the front lines of the pandemic. I'll tell you one story here. Had a patient a few days ago, lady who's a type 1 diabetic, in her 60s, probably 450 pounds. She lost her sense of taste and smell 2 weeks ago and had cold-like symptoms, increasing shortness of breath, nausea, vomiting, like just the bullet list of your classic COVID symptoms. And it's getting worse. Now, where did you get this from? Well, my grandson was here for 10 days and he had a bit of a cold, but we didn't think anything of it. Okay, have you been tested? Do you know if you have COVID? Oh, no, I don't have COVID. I haven't been tested. I just have a cold or something. The rest of my whole family all got cold. Well, did any of them get tested? No. Okay, so your family has been out and about infecting everyone. This is why lockdowns don't work, because people still interact with each other. They still live in homes with each other, and they're going to spread the virus no matter what. And whether you are destroying businesses makes little difference as to whether this family is together in a house and spreading the germs around and not being responsible enough to quarantine themselves when they are actually sick, right? I mean, if the government would have just said, hey, look, if you're sick, if you have anything that looks like a cold, just stay home until the symptoms are gone and you get a negative test. That would have been far superior, in my opinion, to, well, destroying everyone's lives and creating, accelerating the death of Western civilization. But there you go. There's my little rant.
It's a good rant. It's and I agree. Lockdowns, they don't flatten the curve. They just delay the curve. They do nothing. They just destroy the economy. It's such a ridiculous thing to do. I'm all for washing hands and wearing masks and doing things that, help actually prevent the disease. But these government mandated programs don't work.
They don't work. And, people are just sick of them. You're right. Like even this lady who was, in a high risk category. I mean, her oxygen sats are in the low 70%. I wouldn't be surprised if she dies. She should have been super careful. But because the government has drugged this thing on for so long, everyone's getting tired of it. Everyone's letting their guard down. The people that shouldn't be letting their guard down are letting their guard down. If they would have just let the rest of us spread our germs around and, build up some herd immunity, these people might be protected and we might, but anyways, I digress.
I'll keep you forever if we go on about this sort of thing, but no, thanks a lot, Tim. I think it was a good discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, thank you to our listeners for listening to this last minute podcast. Sad news for Canada. It's not looking good, but there you go. Go to libertarian.ca/join. We've been against lockdowns since our founding over 45 years ago. We'll be against lockdowns for the next 45 years. And we're also against things like the income tax. And we're for promoting, we're changing the Constitution to protect private property rights and all sorts of good things. So go to libertarian.ca, check out our platform and join us if you think it's worth fighting for, because man, we really got to push back against this stuff or it's all coming crashing down. And then the only person getting rich is Brandon because he's betting against libertarians. And
I am betting against your electoral success.
I guess that would probably be a wise insurance policy is to bet against liberty winning. But
one quick add-on too is if you liked what you heard, don't hesitate to run as a candidate. Message the party. I'll contact you myself. We can do the vetting, and I can let you know what it looks like to run as a candidate. It's not hard. I did it. Tim's done it. You can do it. So if you are thinking about it, we do expect that there will be some sort of a collapse of the government by the end of the year. Maybe not on this vote, but we are anticipating it. And the sooner you get started, the easier it is. It's a lot of fun. It's the most fun that you can have, and you get to preach about the same things that Tim and I have been talking about today.
Yeah. And guys, I'm a firefighter paramedic. I put wet stuff on red stuff. I'm, basically a blue collar worker. I have no political ambitions. I never did, but I realized a few years ago I had to do something because as much as I wanted to leave politics alone, it wasn't leaving me alone. So if you feel like that, if you feel like me, join us. We're a bunch of volunteers. We're a ragtag group, but our heart's in the right place and we're making some headway. There's more and more people identifying as libertarians. We're going to change culture, and as culture changes, then government will change. So thanks for tuning in, and hopefully we catch you next time.
Thanks, Jim.